let's go ahead and start this day's science class. I've got one more section of the GED to go over with everyone. So this will kind of be the last new content before I kind of start going back through stuff that I've already gone through in terms of online formatted classes. So let me pull up the book here. So hopefully you can see it. I'll talk briefly about it and then kind of go over some stuff. So this first section of the test, or I shouldn't say the first section of the test, the first section of the book focuses on what they call science practices, which are basically just different types of questions you might see and some kind of general concepts you need to know, not necessarily content related. So we've kind of run through all the content that's going to be on the test. Life sciences, which is biology, and biology, sorry, drawing a blank, and ecology, I guess, falls under life sciences. The physical sciences, which consider or include physics and chemistry, and then lastly, earth and space sciences, which are geology and astronomy. So those are kind of all of the content areas that we go over. So again, after this week, kind of cycle back through some of the stuff and hopefully touch on some things that maybe I haven't and make it new. But if you've been attending classes for a long time, just kind of have that heads up that soon we're going to be back to the beginning of kind of where we started and going over the same types of stuff, just like we would in the regular classroom. All right. Well, with that said, we haven't really touched on these different science practices, and so that's kind of where I'm going to spend some time this week. But let me scroll back up to the top of this real quickly, just so I can go over a quick rundown of everything. So the science test is broken down into these categories where you have 40% of the content is based around life sciences and 40% of the content is based around physical science. So biology, physics, chemistry, that makes a big chunk of the test. And only 20% of the test is dealing with earth and space science, so astronomy and geology. Not a very big portion of the test. Okay? But in terms of the science practices, in other words, the types of things that you need to know for the test, the types of skills you need to have, and these are going to be some of the things we talk about this week. Comprehending scientific presentations, so basically a fancy way of saying interpreting science passages and graphics, using the scientific method, which I believe we have talked a little bit about, but we're going to revisit that also. Reason with scientific information, so that's evaluating conclusions and looking at evidence. Applying concepts and formulas, so expressing scientific information and applying scientific theories, not necessarily having these memorized, but just being able to apply them as they're given to you. And then using probabilities and statistics, so there's a little bit of math involved, and we haven't actually touched on this yet, so we're going to spend a couple days, maybe next week, talking about reading charts and graphs, looking at probability, and also looking at stuff like measures of central tendency, so mean, median, mode, range, and spending a day going over that. Because that's something that, with maybe the exception of the reading test, applies to all the tests. Math, science, social studies, you're going to get questions on those types of things on all the tests. So that's kind of where we're going to spend the next little chunk of time, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so for today, I want to spend a little bit of time going over this first lesson, which talks about comprehending scientific presentations. So I'm not going to talk about main idea. I've talked about that plenty between social studies class and here, right? I feel like, when we talk about what the main idea of something is, I feel like we all kind of know it. So I don't need to beat that to me. Just like with social studies, there are going to be passages. So you're going to get questions that talk about main idea, but you're also going to get things that deal with details, facts, conclusions, and evidence, right? So similar, I've talked about this at length in social studies, maybe not quite as much in science. Just being able to differentiate between what a main idea is versus a detail or a conclusion, right? Those are kind of the three big ones. Facts kind of fall under details, so I don't need to discuss that, but we know what a fact is. A fact is something that can be proven to be true, right? But as we look at main idea, detail, conclusion, right? Main idea is usually something general or broad that kind of encompasses everything talked about in the paragraph or the passage. A detail is something very specific that is taken from the passage. And a conclusion, as opposed to the other two things, a conclusion is often something that isn't stated in the passage, but that is an assumption or a hypothesis or something that a statement maybe that can be made based on the information in the passage. So it's not something that's directly mentioned, but it's something that can be assumed to be true or can be assumed to be false or whatever that may be. But it's something that is not stated in the passage. So we'll talk about that a lot as we kind of go through all of this stuff. So again, I don't want to go over that too much because it's something we've gone over in the past. Just kind of give you an idea, right? So I'm going to just go ahead and skip this stuff here. This is all pretty straightforward. And I just want to spend time kind of walking through some of the different concepts on this first set of practice questions and then call it a day. So some of these topics may be slower or faster. So, some of these classes might be a little quicker than normal, but I just want to spend, a day talking about each lesson, and that's it. All right. So the first three questions here deal with this passage. And I'll just read it real briefly, but if you're watching this on your own, feel free to just pause it so you have plenty of time to read through it, and I'll just power through it and then talk about the question and go from there. So the passage says, despite the prevalence of type 2 diabetes, the causes of the disease remain somewhat uncertain. It is likely that some combination of genetics and lifestyle contributes to the development of type 2 diabetes. However, scientists have not fully determined the roles played by various lifestyle factors, diet and exercise. For Americans, one contributing factor may be high sugar consumption. Sugar from food is broken down and absorbed in the bloodstream, and insulin is required for the body to be able to use that sugar. In a study of individuals 18 to 25 years old who consumed more than the recommended amount of sugar daily, it is shown that the majority had significantly elevated levels of glucose in their blood, but normal levels of insulin. In other words, these subjects could not produce enough insulin to allow their bodies to use the amount of sugar they were consuming. Elevated blood glucose levels may put individuals consuming high amounts of sugar at higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes. So, like I always say with science or social studies, you don't need to have a background knowledge on much of this stuff. Right? You don't need to know what diabetes is. You need to be able to read the paragraph and answer the question. Keep it as simple as possible. So the first question just asks, which one of the following is the topic of the entire passage? Okay, topic, another word for main idea, think general. right? You just want to know what is the general idea of what the passage is saying. So, A, sources of sugar in Americans' diet. B, the role of insulin in metabolizing sugar from food. C, the causes of type 2 diabetes. Or D, how to prevent type 2 diabetes. Okay, so I'll spend this time just going over and kind of looking at this like kind of a fresh start for science class, and just talking about, how we should break down a GED question and the best ways to go about answering. So always, unless the right answer just is so easy that you can just pluck it out right away and move on to the next one, which is great. When that's the case, don't spend any extra time on these questions, right? But in general, on both the science and the social studies test, time is of the essence. So don't spend more than 2 or 3 minutes tops on one question. If you find yourself spending 4, 5, 6 minutes on a question, you're wasting too much time and you're going to end up rushing through some of the other questions. Only give yourself a couple minutes, and if you're stumped by then decide whether you're going to guess or whether you're going to move on to the next one, because you can skip them and you can finish them later. So don't spend too much time on any one question. Back to this question here. First thing I do is eliminate a couple obvious ones. So remember, I said when we're talking about topics or main ideas to look for something general, right? Something very specific isn't necessarily going to be the best answer. So an example of that would be B, the role of insulin in metabolizing sugar from food. That's a very specific process that is talked about a little bit in paragraph 2, right? But it's not the whole main idea of the entire passage, right? So throw it out, right? That's a red flag right there. I read that one. It's too specific and too detailed to be a main idea or topic. So it's probably not right. Okay? The next one I'd throw out is A, sources of sugar in Americans' diet. It does talk a lot about sugar, but does it talk about where Americans are getting that sugar from, or where what they're eating that's leading to them having too much sugar? No. Okay. It talks a lot about sugar, but it doesn't talk about the source of that sugar. It just talks about sugar as it's related to diabetes. Okay. So A isn't right either. So I would throw out A and B, and then I'd look and choose between C and D. They both deal with type 2 diabetes, which is good because that seems like the main idea or the main topic, right? Is they're talking about type 2 diabetes. Now we have to decide between, do we feel like the passage is talking about the causes of type 2 diabetes, in other words, what leads to it, or is it talking about how to prevent it? Now, you could twist that around and kind of apply either of those to this passage. But like with any multiple choice test, your goal is to just pick the best one. Because you could say that by talking about what leads to type 2 diabetes, you are also talking about how to prevent it, but not directly, right? So even though you could make an argument for D, right? In reality, the best answer here is just C, right? The causes of type 2 diabetes. What leads to people getting type 2 diabetes? That's what the passage is talking about, right? And it talks about different aspects of that, but the overarching message of the passage is what leads to type 2 diabetes, okay? So let's look at number 2. Following is the main idea of the first paragraph. So, similar to the first question, but different in that now it's just asking about the first paragraph. So, compared to number 1, number 2 can be a little more specific, because number 1 was saying, what is the topic of the whole thing? Number 2 is saying, what is the topic or the main idea of just the first paragraph? So now we're talking about a little more specific. I won't read the whole thing again, but let's look through the answer choices. A, it is likely that sugar consumption contributes to the development of type 2 diabetes. B, it is likely that genetics play a role in the development of type 2 diabetes. C, researchers have discovered the causes of type 2 diabetes. Or D, the causes of type 2 diabetes are not fully understood. Okay? So, let's break that down. Okay? And maybe not spend quite as much time on number 2 as number 1, but let's look at it. Are there any that jump out as being particularly wrong? Well, I would say that if I had to pick one that feels especially wrong, I'd pick A. It is likely that sugar consumption contributes to the development of diabetes. Talk about sugar and sugar as it relates to diabetes doesn't show up in paragraph 1, it shows up in paragraph 2. So for that reason, I'd throw out A. Let's see. The other one I'd throw out would be C. Researchers have discovered the causes of type 2 diabetes. The first sentence literally says, the causes of the disease remain somewhat uncertain, which implies that they haven't discovered exactly what causes it. So C is the next one I throw out. And between B and D, what one sounds like the main idea or the kind of general view of the first paragraph? Is it likely that genetics plays a role in diabetes? The causes of type 2 diabetes are not fully understood. So both of these things are discussed here, but which one sums up the idea of the first paragraph better? And in my opinion, D better encompasses the whole paragraph, right? I think I said that. I meant the causes of type 2 diabetes are not fully understood. It's true, genetics does play a role in the development of type 2 diabetes. It says so right here. It is likely that some combination of genetics and lifestyle contributes to the development of type 2. But that's more of a detail from the paragraph, not so much the main idea. Whereas it says down here, the last sentence, the concluding sentence of this paragraph says, scientists have not fully determined the roles played by various lifestyle factors. But to me, this whole paragraph centers around the fact that we don't quite know the causes of type 2 diabetes. We have an idea, but we don't fully know, right? So for that reason, I'd pick D. Right? And then lastly, number 3, the main idea of the second paragraph is that high sugar consumption may put individuals at greater risk of developing type 2 diabetes. The following details from the second paragraph supports that main idea. So here, it gives you the main idea of the second paragraph. It tells you what the main idea is, but then it says which detail from that paragraph supports or backs up that main idea. A, sugar from food is absorbed in the bloodstream. B, a study of 18 to 25-year-olds showed that a majority did not produce enough insulin to offset the high amounts of sugar they were consuming. C, a study of 18 to 25-year-olds showed that high sugar consumption interacted with genetic factors in a majority of those individuals in order to suppress insulin production. D, it has not been proven that sugar is a contributing factor to the development of type 2 diabetes. Okay, so again, we're looking for what detail supports the main idea. So I don't quite know, without going back and looking directly, I don't remember it mentioning D anywhere. It has not been proven that sugar is a contributing factor for the development of type 2 diabetes. I don't know if it said that, but even if it's in the paragraph somewhere, does that support the main idea? No, that goes against the main idea. So it's not D, even, I don't think it's mentioned in there, but even if it was, D doesn't support the main idea. It counters, it contradicts it, right? It works against it. So I'm throwing out D. And then I'm also throwing out A, sugar from food is absorbed in the bloodstream. That's true. That is a true statement. But does that alone back up the idea that high sugar consumption puts individuals at risk of diabetes? No, that's just a detail about how sugar, or not even how, just the fact that sugar from food does get absorbed in the bloodstream. For me, I'm picking between B and C. And if I look in that middle section of the paragraph, I don't see anything in there about C, right? High sugar consumption interacts with genetic factors, blah, 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 right? So for me, the best choice here is B. A study of 18 to 25-year-olds showed that a majority did not produce enough insulin to offset the amounts of sugar they were consuming, right? Which is this middle section. That best supports the main idea, in my opinion. So I'm going with B, right? And then last but not least here, let's do number 4. And number 4 looks at this graphic here. The title for the graphic is How Topography Contributes to Precipitation. So if you can't read it, here, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. It's still kind of blurry. So down here, and I'll kind of read through it. So we have moist air, and we have ascending, I can't even read that word. Let's say ascending air and / condensation. Here we have precipitation. We have cloud development. Then over here we have descending air. Oh, I think that says cooling. Down here it says descending air, warming, drying, and clouds dispersing. So what this is showing, is that topography, right? In this case, the shape of the land. Not in this case, topography. How the shape of the land contributes to precipitation. And this is a great example of Washington State. Topography contributes directly to precipitation. In other words, how much moisture Western Washington gets versus Eastern Washington. Why does Western Washington get a lot more precipitation? Moist air comes in off the ocean, condenses, builds as it rises up over the mountains, and then when it gets into the mountains, clouds develop and release all that moisture, and then as they come down the other side, those clouds have lost their moisture, and they tend to disperse, and the air tends to warm and dry. So we have a much drier, warmer climate in Eastern Washington than they do in Western Washington. And that's because of the topography of the Cascade Mountains. All right, so back to our question. Our question says, which statement correctly describes the process depicted in the graphic above? A, as moist flowing air encounters rising elevations, it cools, which causes condensation, a stage that precedes precipitation, cloud development. Okay? B, once above the tree line, flowing air is likely to slow down and stop moving and then collect in the form of snow. C, clouds dissipate before encountering mountain peaks. D, moist air flows from the west, while drier air usually flows from the east. All right. So, right away I could point out flaws in the 3 false answers pretty quickly, right? And partly, this is because I've done this question a lot, but if we really break down these answer choices, 3 of them fall apart and only 1 is left. D, moist air flows from the west, dry air flows from the east. Okay, so that's wrong for a couple reasons. First of all, even if the left side of this map or this picture was west and the right side of it was east, it would still be wrong. Because what they're describing is dry air coming in from this side and moist air coming in from this side, right? And that's not what this is saying. This is saying that the airflow is like this, right? From left to right. But it's wrong also because there's no mention of west or east on it. Right? West and east are directions, and just based on looking at that picture, we don't know where west and east are, right? This picture could be totally flipped around. And west might be on this side and east might be over here. We don't know because there's no compass telling us where north is. Right? So don't assume that this is west and this is east unless they tell you specifically with a compass or something else, right? That's the first flaw with D. Okay? C, clouds dissipate before encountering mountain peaks. Okay? Where do I see clouds dissipate? Cloud dissipation, right here at the end. And is that before, in the mountains, or after the mountains? The clouds dissipate after encountering the mountains, right? The moist air goes up, clouds form, go over the mountains, and then they dissipate. So C is just a false statement. And lastly, B, once above tree line, flowing air is likely to slow down and stop moving and then collect in the form of snow. So, a few things that stand out to me as being wrong with this. Once above tree line, flowing air is likely to slow down and stop moving. Is there anything on here that tells us how slow or fast things are going? There's no mention of speed at all, right? So even if that was true, which it can be, right? Flowing air can rise and slow down, but the fact that it says stop is questionable because flowing air doesn't really ever stop, right? So stop is a pretty definitive word. But also, there's nothing on this chart that shows us anything about slowing or stopping. And then finally, then collect in the form of snow. There's nothing in here about snow other than the picture of these tops of these mountains is covered in snow, right? But this is a pretty rudimentary drawing. So B, C, and D just don't stand up to any scrutiny. And A is the only one that makes any logical sense after you look at it. Moist flowing air encounters rising elevations, cools, causes condensation, stage that precedes precipitation. Condensation is here, precipitation is here, and cloud development is here. Right? So A is the only one that adds up when you look at them closely. Okay, so that's all I've got for today's class. Hopefully that was beneficial. If not, I will pick up a new topic tomorrow and we'll start fresh then. And until then, that's all I've got for science. Have a good one.